the images of this book will haunt you. I can promise you that. Hey everyone, welcome to Travel Through Stories. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk about Ariana Harwicz's novel, Die, My Love, just translated from the Spanish by Sarah Moses and Carolina Orloff. This book was published in 2017 by Charco Press, which is a small independent press based in Edinburgh, and they really focus on contemporary Latin American literature. Harwicz is an Argentinian writer who has spent a lot of time in France, and this book was actually nominated for the International Booker, I think back in 2018. And the reason why I'm picking it up now is because the third book in the so-called involuntary trilogy, that's what Harwicz calls it, was just published back in February. So I decided to read the whole trilogy now. These three books, Die, My Love, Feeble-Minded, and Tender, make up what Harwicz calls the involuntary trilogy, which is more of a thematic trilogy than anything else. The storyline doesn't continue through these books, but all of these books are focused on similar topics: family dynamics, child-parent relationships, more specifically motherhood, and sex. And they all take on this certain tone, which is that of, well, madness or neurosis. They're deranged, chaotic, lustful, violent. They're horrific in the literal sense. These books are intense. Die, My Love is told in the first person, and our narrator is this new and young mother who is living in rural France with her husband, her mother-in-law, and her newborn baby, of course. The narrator is unnamed, as are almost all the characters in this novel, which is an important point, I think. But our narrator is a foreigner to this region. It's unclear where exactly she's from, but she's learning French, and so she's treated very much as an outsider to this small rural community in which she's living. And the plot of this book is very simple. It's a young mother who is dealing with, well, being a new mother, and her reckoning with the fact that her life has irrevocably changed from what it was before. And that's really it. There isn't really much of a plot, but there is so much going on in our narrator's head that makes this book just incredibly interesting and so readable. But suffice to say, concerning the main focus of this book, it's motherhood and the problems that arise out of motherhood. That is the primary conflict in this book. And this is a pretty well-trodden conflict to explore. It's almost a trope of the disassociated or disassociating mother that we see in works by authors as various as Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Sylvia Plath, Kate Chopin, Kjersti Skomsvold, Jesmyn Ward, etc. In a lot of these works, we're asked to sympathize with these mothers as they're being kind of neglected by their communities or isolated from their communities because of their motherhood. This is kind of what's going on here, but the stakes here are ramped up as our narrator is clearly dealing with some form of neurosis. And as such, she's unreliable and, well, let me just read you the moment in the book that I fully came to realize that I wasn't dealing with an ordinary book about an ordinary mother. As soon as all the others had escaped their rooms to digest their meals, I heard my father-in-law cutting the grass beneath the snow with his new green tractor, and thought that if I could lynch my whole family to be alone for 1 minute with Glenn Gould, I'd do it. There's clearly a lot of dark humor going on in this book, but yeah, it's not an optimistic or idealistic look at motherhood by any means. It's a raw and unflinching gaze into what repercussions motherhood could lead to. And I'm really trying here to toe the line between simply concluding that our narrator is clinically insane and offering a sympathetic look at how her surroundings and her role as a new mother and how she's probably dealing with things like postpartum depression, how all of these things are almost pushing her into this new state. But she's a narrator who is difficult to pin down, and she's difficult to sympathize with, as her thoughts move very quickly from the most mundane thoughts in the world to these violent fantasies. This book isn't easy to read, as these violent fantasies come up again and again and again. But I think it really offers just a fascinating critique of the sort of idealization of motherhood, that kind of image of motherhood that for so long dominated all depictions of motherhood. In fact, this book opens with this kind of trope and smashing it to pieces immediately. I lay back in the grass among fallen trees, and the sun on my palm felt like a knife I could use to bleed myself dry with one swift cut to the jugular. Behind me, against the backdrop of a house somewhere between dilapidated and homely, I could hear the voices of my son and my husband, both of them naked, both of them splashing around in the blue paddling pool, the water 35 degrees. It was the Sunday before a bank holiday. I was a few steps away, hidden in the underbrush, spying on them. How could a weak, perverse woman like me, someone who dreams of a knife in her hand, be the mother and wife of those two individuals? What was I going to do? I burrowed deeper into the ground, hiding my body. I wasn't going to kill them. I dropped the knife and went to hang out the washing like nothing had happened. Harwicz writes in this almost staccato prose, in these short, bursting sentences, each of which is exploding with beautiful and disturbing imagery. And each of these short sentences string together to create this hypnotic whirlwind as our narrator's thoughts move from classical music, she's very learned, to having sex with her neighbor, to murdering her whole family, to what she wants to eat for dinner. When my husband's away, every second of silence is followed by a horde of demons infiltrating my brain. A rat jumps into a see-through roof. She seems to be enjoying herself, the crazy little thing. Every minute or so, I go and check the baby still breathing. I touch him to see if he responds, uncover him, change his position, shine a light on him, pick him up. He's still at an age when caught death is a risk. Then I get a hold of myself, make a sandwich, and sit down in front of the TV. But right away, the ag of an owl, that genital sound, involuntary and erotic, terrifies me. I turn off the TV and imagine an orgy of animals, a stag, a rat, and a wild boar. I laugh, but then the jumble of creatures is suddenly frightening. The legs, wings, tails, and scales tangle up, racing and racing towards pleasure. How does a wild boar ejaculate? There's just so much amazing imagery throughout this book concerning animals. I could read passages from it all day, but I'll try to restrain myself. It seems as though our narrator is struggling with the fact that she no longer has the ability to act however she wants. And so to make up for this, her mind becomes completely unchained, and it begins to delve into the deepest recesses of her desires. What makes this book so shocking and effective, though, is how seamlessly it moves between these super mundane thoughts and these insane thoughts. It's often difficult to tell what is even real and what is imagined, as these lines begin blurring quite early on, as her dreams begin manifesting in deeply unsettling ways, but we often don't see the consequences of her actions, and thus we're forced to question if that action even occurred or if she just dreamed it. But this blend of dream and reality here works so well because it's so believable. If you've ever been seriously sleep deprived, you know what I mean, and I can only imagine that this is just ramped up to 11 if you are a new mother. As I mentioned though, these thoughts are just unhinged. They're very often violent as she fantasizes about killing her family. I lit a candle and looked at the piano again, feeling an urge to play a note. I searched. Some people need to be able to see the ocean, but I need to be able to see a firearm, even if it's motionless, dirty, and unloaded. When my husband opened one eye, he found me aiming at him. And I won't read the rest of this scene. But throughout the rest of this very short novel, she continues to come back to this, as her and her husband are clearly having some problems, because, well, understanding one another is too violent. It's better to keep quiet, play dumb. That's what I do. The narrator feels like she isn't in control of her life, and she really isn't. There's some of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper here, as her husband really doesn't take her opinions or her clear mental illness seriously. He barely listens to her. And while she isn't locked up and forced to try a rest cure or something like that, like what happens to the narrator of The Yellow Wallpaper, she is so often segregated and on the outside looking in, quite literally a lot of the times, as she's often outside looking in through a window at her family. We saw this in the opening lines, which always remind me of that Andrew Wyeth painting, Christina's World, as our narrator is laying out in the field looking in on the domestic space where she, according to normative gender rules, should inhabit. And this otherness is only amplified when she becomes a mother and is segregated to the role of child rearing. When asked in an interview what inspired or why she wrote this novel, Ariana Harwicz responded, quote, Motherhood as a form of prison, a trap, an ordinary destiny. Writing the novel was a chance to escape that. There's something about engaging with this anger, with this madness, that seems to alleviate this imprisonment, at least for a bit. It's as if relishing in these fantasies allows her to take a walk around the prison grounds before returning back to her cell. But what Harwicz does is make this not quite relatable. I mean, as a man without children, I can't fully relate to this, but she makes it so believable. Her narrator's neurosis is fascinating and disturbing, but against all odds, you begin to root for her, even though she's thinking constantly about murdering her family. There's trauma, fears of abandonment, and fears of entrapment at the core of this novel. And the prose is just so gorgeous as you're sucked into the madness of this book, and you just want to figure out what's going to come out of it. I really don't think I've read an author pull off this visceral, almost cinematic, mounting tension for a while. The experience of reading Harwicz reminded me a lot of my experience reading Fernanda Melchor's Hurricane Season. Not necessarily because the prose styles are similar or anything like that. They're actually quite different, though the imagery is similar enough. Melchor writes in these long, looping sentences, whereas Harwicz wields the power of these very short, bursting sentences. But both of these authors are able to convey this budding tension, this compacted energy, this anxious sense of dread that something is going to explode. And it's hard to look away until you witness the explosion. I thought this book was just phenomenal, especially considering how short it was. It's barely over 100 pages. It was very transgressive, and in that way, it's definitely not for everyone, and that's okay. But Harwicz uses this very lyrical but staccato prose with these visceral and gorgeous and haunting images to create a whirlwind of a book that once you start reading, you're not going to be able to stop. And once you're done reading, the images of this book will haunt you. I can promise you that. Let me know if you've read this one. I know I'm a bit late to the party on Die My Love, but Harwicz is a writer that I really admire after reading the first two books in the Involuntary trilogy, and I plan to read the third very shortly. But I really think that more people should read her short but gorgeous and devastatingly haunting novels. Anyways, for now, thanks for watching.